Hello everybody, it's John Pollock alongside Cody Saftic, and we are coming out of the conference call to announce the official formation of the MMA Athletes Association, featuring Bjorn Rebney and then a board of fighters consisting currently of Tim Kennedy, George St-Pierre, Cain Velasquez, TJ Dillashaw, and Donald Cerrone. A very interesting call, Cody. I think this is one that before we get ahead of ourselves, which I'm sure many people are, I think the idea of this transforming the industry, while I don't discredit the fact that this could be the building blocks for that, I still have lots of questions coming out of this. And while it's the formation of an association, which they made clear, not a union, Bjorn Rebney outlining a union would actually be their worst case, their worst option. So it's an association that is formed, but I mean, coming out of this, I think we all want to see what the game plan is going to be, because they were not going to disclose that game plan publicly.
No, and it seemed like going into this, it's okay, you know what, they got the right places in the right pieces in place, They've got obviously the fighters that they think will have the most impact to this cause. But even hearing Donald Cerrone say right off the bat, well, part of the reason I'm happy to be here is I want to hear more about this. He didn't know what he was getting behind, and I felt that was the message coming out of this. It seemed a tad bit disorganized, but obviously they didn't want to give us all the information. I really think to myself, though, when you talk about that labor strike and you talk about you're planting that idea of, well, worst case scenario, we're willing to walk. But then you got guys like Ian McCall calling in and being like, how are you going to get me on board? I'm not going to walk. And you got other guys there. And you talked about, a bunch of great fighters, TJ Dillashaw, Tim Kennedy, Cain Velasquez. Other than George St-Pierre and obviously Bjorn Rebney, they all have booked fights coming up. So clearly they're not looking to strike. They don't want to not fight. And it'd be crazy to think a guy like Donald Cerrone, who prides himself on fighting half a dozen times a year, would be willing to take a full year off to fight this cause out. So as you mentioned, a ton of questions. Obviously, we're not labor law experts, but these are just preliminary thoughts on what happened on the conference call.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of my interest is what exactly are the legal options that they have. You have fighters that are under UFC contracts, as you mentioned, all but George St-Pierre expected to fight in the very near future for the UFC. It's not as though they are refusing to fight. These are the only names we know of. They kind of hinted at further announcements are going to be made. But also, what I'm just going to label it as somewhat problematic potentially is the outline that they do have investment that they weren't going to go into. They have an office in Orange County. They have employees. They're going to be traveling all over the place to meet with fighters, go to gyms. It seems like there's going to be some significant overhead to all of this as well. And I just don't know what the next move is going to be. What is going to be the move here? Because another thing they outlined, Cody, which was interesting, was they have not contacted the UFC, nor do they plan to, because their plan does not require contacting the UFC. So that's kind of cryptic.
Well, that was the crazy thing to me, is that going into this, everyone on the net is talking about it's going to be the talks of a union, it's going to be talks of a union. And then going into it, that's right away what they say is this is not a union, it's a player association. Well, are you going to meet with the UFC? No, we don't plan on it. Well, what do you want? Well, we want 50% instead of the 8%, which they're claiming for the revenue split. But they know what they want clearly, but it doesn't seem like they have any direction how to get there. If you're the UFC and the UFC simply says, no, we don't want to talk with you, then what's the next step? They don't want to do a lawsuit. They're talking about they don't want to go down that route. They're basically saying the UFC will come to us, which I don't think they will.
The labor strike and litigation, they stated they were options, but it seemed that is the
worst
last step.
Scenario.
The last step we would take would be a labor strike or litigation. Now, do you feel that this would have been received differently had this preceded the announcement of the PFA over the summer? Because that was something that there was a big press conference back in August in Las Vegas. It got a lot of attention, and now we're seeing that sort of start to crumble with Leslie Smith leaving, with Lucas Middlebrook leaving the PFA. I think that's thrown some skepticism out there amongst fighters, some who had pledged their allegiance and then their names were leaked after being informed of confidentiality. Do you think that there's a certain skepticism that wouldn't have been there if the PFA problems had not come to light over the last couple of days?
Absolutely. You see this in a lot of industry too. Obviously there's a need for a player union. People are not saying that there's no need for a union whatsoever, but they got to figure out the best way to go about it. What you're going to have is you're going to have Organization A, and they're going to say, well, we got Nate Quarry, and we've got Kung Lee, and we got guys, and we're going to start, Carlos Noon's been working on a union for quite some time now. So you get those guys that are going to start something. Then you have what Middlebrook has and Leslie Smith have, the PFA, and they got a bunch of good players behind them. They got a bunch of notable union representatives from the NHL, from the NHLPA, obviously, get them all in the same boat. And still that doesn't do anything. Now you're having this third. I've seen this a lot with commissions. When you have someone who's trying to, let's say a new province or a new state's going to have a new commission, you're going to have 3 or 4 organizations popping up trying to grasp hold of that. That's what seems here. Now, these guys happen to have former UFC champions behind them. They happen to have George St-Pierre, big name value. So it seems like this is the strongest push. But when I really think back on it, there's been strong pushes in the past, so I don't know what makes this any different. I don't personally see it happening, although I would love to see it happen. Let's say, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate, this is not what I believe, but let's say the UFC says to themselves, okay, cut all 5 of those guys. What does that change for the UFC's business model? Nothing. They're not selling less pay-per-views on it, and yes, they're losing supporting cast guys like Cain Velasquez. I don't want to see that happen. But the UFC, at the end of the day, they have the ball in their court, so they're not obligated to play ball with these guys, and that's what it seems like. It seems like, well, we've got 5 guys and a bunch more that are unhappy, so we're not going to call you, you call us. That just seems crazy to me.
Well, that was kind of brought up about possible problems for these fighters aligning themselves with this association and what the fallout could be. And I mean, Bjorn Rebney made this pretty clear that if the UFC were to be retaliatory, they would be opening themselves up to litigation, essentially. That
yes.
This would be that would be a massive error on the UFC and WME IMG's part to do something like that. I think that if there is anything perceived, I think that's going to scare a lot of fighters off of wanting to join this. I think you'll hear privately, many fighters want to see, I mean, there is no disputing that they need collective bargaining, and the amount of power that UFC fighters have lost over the years and where they stand now, there is no argument to me in favor of this current model existing. They went so far on this call to state that in this current incarnation, this industry is not going to exist at this rate because of the disparity in power to the lack thereof of these fighters. So I want to see this work. I want to see these fighters get their proper share, which I do not believe they're getting at the moment. But I think you have to be skeptical at what this is going to grow into. What is their battle plan? We were left after that call just it's speculation as to what their plan is because they aren't going to reveal their hand. I wouldn't advise them to do that on a public call like that. But you have 5 fighters at the moment attached to this. That's very different than stating we have 3/4 of the UFC, which again, we should bring up. They stated that this is focused on the UFC and WME IMG and not so much an industry-wide association for fighters.
And how did Bjorn Rebney exactly come about this is what I'm not grasping, because when the name of the fighters came out, everyone was, oh, you know what? Every single one of these fighters has complained about something in the past regarding fighter pay or fighter treatment. So it makes sense for them to all jump on the same page. But no one really had heard anything from Bjorn Rebney. So he comes out, and the biggest thing that I'm noticing from other media members or just talk online is that people don't really trust this guy. And you have someone like Shannon Knapp, the president of Invicta FC. She comes out and she says, you know what? I'm really weary of what this man's intentions are because he's screwed fighters in the past. That if he accepts even $1 single from this, then I know something's wrong. But if he's looking to do this for the good of the sport and he's looking to right the wrongs he's made, and they mentioned that on the cause, Tim Kennedy mentioned that, he's going to right the wrong. So now there's this aura of, well, this guy's not.
He also stated in reference to Rebney that no one's perfect.
No one's perfect.
I mean, this is a lightning rod of a figure, and granted, they made it. They stated he is not the leader of this. He is not even a board member. He stated he's been working on this for about 2 years. He's not made a penny from this.
And so how does that man make his income at this point? Because he's flying around. He said he's got ground troops that are. He's gonna go to Canada, and we're going to California. We're gonna meet with all these gyms. I didn't really understand. And another thing,
and that makes no sense to me. That makes no sense to me. The need that you need an office in Orange County, that you need to be traveling all across, like raking up airline expenses, paying rent for an office. Like why?
He's doing this for free? That seems crazy.
Like, why are we worried about cosmetic offices, for instance, when these are phone calls, these are one-on-one meetings, these do not require, to me, the expenses that they're throwing out there, and that to me was concerning when I heard that. I mean, this to me is, I think, cautiously optimistic should be everyone's kind of path into this.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I personally feel like if McGregor or Rousey are not behind it, it certainly hurts. Because as I mentioned, if they're looking for people they can replace, they can't replace those 2 individuals. They can't replace anybody like that. And those are their big stars. So I would expect them to try to keep those people happy. And if a couple of people are dissatisfied along the mix. But one last thing that I really took from it is that he says, but Jordan Rebney says, well, you know what? Guys from Jackson's will now reach out to Cowboy and say, I want to be a part. And the guys from AK will reach out to Kane. Just because you have one figurehead from that gym, it doesn't mean anything. I saw John Fitch get cut for not wanting to give away his likeness for a UFC video game. No one backed that guy. He's not even at AK anymore because you get cut from the UFC and no one wants to stand up and say, why are they cutting John Fitch? It makes no sense. It's just a business. It's how it goes. These fighters know they have a small window to be as successful as they possibly can, and I don't see anybody sitting out. This is not, don't cross the picket fence where we're laying it down at the grocery store. This is, I have 5 or 6 years of the prime of my career as a professional athlete. I can't sit out. I really don't expect them to sit out, and that's what they need to do, so it's a tough sell.
I wish these guys all the best because
Absolutely.
These fighters need representation. They need collective bargaining. I hope any of these associations are able to make it and get the majority on board and make real changes. But it's also going to be interesting next week, Cody, because Tim Kennedy and Donald Cerrone are on this card in Toronto, and how much attention this story is going to cover with two guys that are fighting for the UFC next week that will be doing interviews. And this, to me, is the only topic you could be talking about these fighters with. Their fights are really, to me, secondary to this item.
But Donald Cerrone hardly fielded any questions today on this conference call because basically he didn't really know what was going on. And he mentioned, I don't want to take a labor strike. And his biggest concern, he goes, well, I want to talk about pension because what's going on after I'm done fighting? Those are his concerns, stuff like pension. So if you want to talk to him prior to getting ready for a fight with Matt Brown, pension is something not really he's thinking about. So I get that it all sounds like good stuff. I want pensions for them. They talked about guys like Jens Pulver, Gary Goodridge. I want medical care for them.
Of course.
Because this is not my field of expertise, I'm trying to think how this is possible, and I don't see it. So I wish them nothing but the best, but this is going to be a very big uphill battle, and expect the next 3 or 5 years to just be a grind if this is what they're serious about doing.
We will be following this story very closely over the days and weeks to come. For Cody Saftic, I'm John Pollock.